In this video, we're going to talk about the manual. Let's go ahead and dive into it. First off, I want to start with an overview. So the manual is a book that basically contains all of our policies, a lot of the how-tos, and a lot of the guidelines and training that you'll need to know in order to do your job. Now, the manual is divided into a couple of different sections. Everybody, regardless of your position in the company, whether you're an office or a technician or a sales rep or a manager, everybody will have basic. There's an insert called basic training, and it's the largest section. It's about 100 pages as of the date that we're doing this video. And it has a lot of the theory on pest control. It has our organizational values, core values, and things like that. It explains pricing, just a whole wealth of information. That's called basic training. And then depending on your position in the company, you'll have your own specific insert. So technicians will have a technician insert, office staff will have an office insert, etc., etc. Then there's another section which is called bug knowledge. And the bug knowledge or pest knowledge is basically just the insert that talks about the variety of different bugs and pests that we treat. It talks about what they are and some of their biological makeup, and then it talks about how to get rid of them. It's a really, really effective section because it's just this short, 2 or 3 paragraphs per bug, and from that you'll learn a ton about what those bugs are, what those pests are, and how to treat them. It's really, really valuable. Obviously, there's more training above and beyond what's in that pest insert, that bug knowledge insert, but it provides a foundation to start. So that's what the manual is. Let's talk about the importance of the manual. We hire and fire based on the manual and the contents therein. And so it's an extremely important manual. It will teach you how to do your job. As a new technician or as a new office staff, new salesperson, the most important thing that you could do is to read the manual several times, cover to cover several times. Typically, if you're just an average reader, you'd probably be able to read through the whole manual in a few hours, 4 or 5 hours at the most. And so you definitely could get, in 2 or 3 weeks, you could get through the manual a couple of times. And really apply yourself and learn everything in the manual, and it'll help you a lot. You'll be a way better employee. You'll be a superstar. The best employees that we've had are the ones that learn the manual and learn it quick. So it's extremely, extremely important. The other thing is be proactive about learning the manual. There's certain things in there where it will save a lot of time, and not only your time, but also company time, and save you having to ask questions that you don't need to ask. So a good example of this is like, when's payday? That's one of the first things that people ask. And I get it, everybody wants to know that, but it's in the manual. And so the quicker that you get through that manual and the quicker you understand what's in it, the quicker you can be like, oh, okay, I don't need to ask that question. Also, managers are trained and should be trained that if you ask a question that is already in the manual, we train them pretty rigorously to not answer your question. We tell them to tell you it's in the manual, go look it up in the manual. And the reason why, they're not trying to be rude to you or whatever, we're just trying to create a culture where employees first look to the manual to solve their own problems. There's 2 critical reasons why we want to do that. The first reason is because it saves time. Every time you have to ask a manager or another employee in the company, that just takes up their time to have to answer this question for you. And we put it in the manual for a reason, which is so that you don't have to do that. The other reason why we want to refer you back to the manual is because as we get you in the habit of going to the manual, not only will you solve that one question that you asked, but in the effort of you, in your effort to try to answer that question, you're probably going to inadvertently find the answers to 2 or 3 other questions and prevent you from having to ask them. And so be proactive. If you have any question, before you ask anyone that question, you got to think to yourself, is this in the manual? And if you're not sure, go check the manual first and see if you can find it. It's probably in the manual. 99% of your questions are probably in that manual. If it's not, and you ask a question, then we'll answer your question. We'll probably put it in the manual. So it's extremely important. Now, one other thing, I mentioned this earlier, we hire and fire based on the contents of the manual. As an employee, that should be super, super comforting to you. Now, I understand that everybody, when they have a job, they obviously want to do a good job and they want to keep the job. And sometimes that causes people anxiety because they feel like, am I doing a good job? That's the question. Am I doing a good job? Well, you can rest assured that if you're doing everything according to the manual, you're doing a good job. And let's say you make a mistake, but it's an honest mistake. It wasn't in the manual. You read it in the manual, or like you read the manual several times, and then you made this judgment call, and it turns out you made a bad decision, but it wasn't something that was prohibited or discussed in the manual. I guarantee you there's not going to be any repercussion. Unless, obviously, if it's something that's like a flagrant, don't punch a customer in the face. But if you punch a customer in the face, you can't be like, well, it wasn't in the manual, I didn't know. Obviously, you should know. Other things that aren't gross misconduct, if you do something quote unquote wrong, but it's not in the manual, you're probably not even going to be disciplined. We'll just be like, okay, well, we need to put that in the manual, and then we'll put it in the manual, and then you won't be able to do it anymore. But for that one incident, you're not going to be disciplined for. I'll give you a good example of this. A long time ago, I worked for a pest control company. This was when I was in college, and they gave me a manual. I read the manual, and about a month or so into my employment, I used the truck for personal use. Now, coming from Penguin's culture, you might be like, why would you even think that you could do that? Because clearly you can't. Well, you have to understand, at that time, I had come from a culture in an industry where company vehicles were used for personal use. It was just part of the culture in the industry that I had came from. And so I assumed that I could use it for personal use. Now, obviously, I should have asked first, and I get it. But I drove the truck. It went about an hour out of my way, 2 hours out of my way, actually. And when I came back, I mentioned it to the service manager, and he's like immediately was visibly upset, and he's like, you did what? And I was like, well, yeah, I drove the truck. I didn't think that'd be a problem. And he's like, yeah, that's a big problem. And then in the course of our discussion, he's like, well, it's in the manual. And in my mind, I was like, no, it's not. I didn't say that to him, but I was like, no, it's not. Because I read the manual, and it's not in there. And so, I was obviously very polite, very respectful in the conversation. But then later I went back and I looked in the manual, and I was in fact right. It was not in the manual. And I felt somewhat, I felt like the company did me a little bit of a disservice. It wasn't a big deal. They ended up, there was a little bit of discipline. And there were some things going on that I didn't know about. I had actually been hired to replace a guy that was fired because he used the company truck for personal use. That was the reason, like the official reason why they let that guy go, and then I took his spot. And they really liked me. I think I was a good employee. And my manager's name was Dave. He loved me. He thought I was great. But at the same time, he didn't want to look like he was having some sort of favoritism. And obviously that is exactly what it would look like, because he fires this guy for using the company truck for personal use. And then I come along and use it for personal use. And so he's like, I got to do something. So what they did is they ended up suspending me for a day without pay, which is, whatever. It wasn't that big of a deal. And I was very cordial about it. But now, based on that experience, I have just concluded that I would never, ever do that in my company. So if it's not actually in the manual, you won't be disciplined for it. Again, with the exception of gross misconduct. But you can just take comfort in knowing that if you read the manual thoroughly, cover to cover, and you abide by the contents therein, and you do everything correctly according to the manual, take heart and just rest assured that you're doing a good job. And so it can give you a little bit of confidence in mitigating the anxiety about your job. That's what we need you to do. Again, if you ever do something that you shouldn't have done, but it's not in the manual, you can be bold and be like, "That, I'm really sorry I did that. It's not in the manual. I didn't know." And the culture within Penguin will be like, "Okay, that's cool. You didn't know. Fair enough. It's not in the manual. We get it. But then we'll put it in the manual. Like type. We'll put it in the manual, and then it will be in the manual from that point on." So that's our culture with the manual. It's a very, very effective tool to training, getting everybody on the same page. Use it, use it, use it. One other thing about your manual, keep it handy. If you're a salesperson, you should have a place for it in your binder. If you're a technician, you've got your black binder. Keep it there. Keep it handy. Use it often. Read it every month or two. Probably should read it cover to cover every month for the first 6 or so months of your employment, and then thereafter you should probably read it once every 3 or 4 months. One other thing, part of the manual, so you've got the manual, which is the written manual. Then you've got these videos, which are part of the manual curriculum. And then you also have your QRH. And all of those things are what constitute our written, documented, quote-unquote manual. So keep track of all those and use them. And that is all I've got.